Look at Warwick. The washed-up soldier playing hero with a child's nonsense, sneered Gerald Price, Langston's lawyer, as the courtroom erupted in mocking laughter. In the tense Arlington courtroom, Caleb Warwick, a former tomb guard, stood firm despite the jeers, his sharp eyes locked on 8-year-old Emma's subtle distress signal, her hand clenching, thumb raised, repeated twice. The judge and spectators dismissed him as a delusional veteran, but Caleb's military-honed instincts screamed she was in danger. Then, a juror's hushed gasp revealed she'd seen faint bruises on Emma's wrist, confirming Caleb's suspicion and shifting the trial's focus from fraud to a chilling revelation of abuse. Let's go back to that day. It was a muggy July morning in Arlington. Caleb Warwick, a lean 38-year-old with close-cropped hair and steady eyes, stood at the back of the courthouse, his security uniform sharp, badge glinting faintly. He was there for Victor Langston's fraud trial, the room buzzing with whispers and Langston's smug grin. But Caleb's gaze locked on Emma, the 8-year-old beside Langston, her small frame tense under his heavy hand. Emma's pigtails trembled as she sat, eyes darting like a caged bird's. Caleb, trained to spot the smallest details through years of standing watch, caught her hand clench, thumb raised, then released twice. The international distress signal. Nobody noticed Judge Hawthorne's shuffled papers. Jurors looked bored. Langston's lawyer strutted. Caleb's grip tightened on his chair. Speaking up mid-trial was a risk, but his sergeant's words rang clear. Be sure. Then act. He was sure. Caleb stood, slow and steady, his boots quiet on the hardwood. Your Honor, he said, voice clear, cutting through the chatter. That girl's in trouble. She's signaling for help. The room went dead silent for a split second, then exploded. Laughter, gasps, murmurs. Judge Hawthorne's gavel hovered, his eyes narrowing. What did you say? Sir, he snapped. Caleb didn't waver. She's making a distress signal. Your Honor, hand clenched, thumb up, twice. It's international code. The laughter came harder now, led by Price, who spun around, smirking. This guy's a wannabe hero, Your Honor. A kid fidgets, and he's seeing secret codes. The crowd roared, a few clapping like it was a comedy show. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on Emma. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, locking onto his for a fleeting moment. A security guard, Mike, an old acquaintance from Caleb's tomb days, leaned in close. Sit down, man, he hissed. You're going to lose your job over this. Caleb didn't move. Emma's hands were shaking now, her thumb twitching like she wanted to signal again but couldn't. Price kept at it, his voice dripping with scorn. What's next? Warwick. She's blinking in Morse code. The laughter stung, sharp and raw, but Caleb stood firm. I know what I saw, he said, his voice low but steady. She needs help. A juror. An older woman with gray curls, Clara Hensley, leaned forward, her eyes flicking to Emma's wrist. Caleb caught it, the way her face changed, like she'd seen something too. It wasn't much, but it kept him grounded. Hawthorne slammed his gavel. Warwick, you're out of line. Sit, or you're out. Caleb nodded once and sat, his eyes never leaving Emma. Outside the courtroom, during a break, Caleb stood by a window, the humid air seeping through a crack. A young reporter, barely out of college, approached him, notebook in hand. So, you're the guy causing all the fuss, she said, her tone sharp, like she was fishing for a scandal. You really think a kid's hand twitch is some big conspiracy? Caleb looked at her, his eyes steady, and said, I think a kid's scared, and I'm not ignoring it. The reporter scoffed, scribbling furiously, already twisting his words. He saw her badge Arlington Gazette and knew what was coming, another headline painting him as a fool. But as she walked away, he noticed Emma's bracelet again. Visible as she passed with Langston, it had a tiny charm, a star, glinting faintly. Something about it stuck with him, a detail he couldn't shake, like a clue waiting to be understood. The trial plowed on, Langston's fraud charges dominating the arguments. Caleb's mind was elsewhere, replaying Emma's signal, the fear in her eyes. He noticed her sleeve slip slightly, revealing faint purple marks on her wrist. Bruises. Fresh ones. His stomach churned. He wanted to act, but he needed more than a hunch. When the court recessed, Clara Hensley passed him, her voice low. I saw it too. The signal, and those marks on her wrist. Her eyes were steady, her voice shaky but sure. Caleb nodded, a spark of relief hitting him. He wasn't crazy. He watched Langston leave with Emma, his hand still clamped on her shoulder, her steps small and hesitant. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep, the image of Emma's signal burning in his mind. He'd sworn to honor the fallen at the tomb, but this was different. This was about saving someone right in front of him. Back in the courtroom the next morning, Caleb's presence drew more sneers. A man in a tailored suit, sitting near the front, turned to his colleague and muttered, "This Warwick guy's a disgrace," dragging the military's name through the mud. His words carried, sharp and deliberate, meant for Caleb to hear. The colleague nodded, smirking, and added, "Bet he's just bored, making up stories to feel important." Caleb's hand brushed the faded tomb guard badge in his pocket, his fingers lingering on its edges. He didn't respond, but his shoulders squared, his posture a silent rebuke. Emma sat across the room, her eyes downcast, her fingers twisting that bracelet. Caleb noticed Langston's grip tighten on her shoulder when she shifted, a warning she couldn't miss. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, but Caleb's resolve hardened, his focus unshaken by the whispers. The next day, Caleb was back, standing at his post, eyes on Emma. She looked paler, her hands knotted in her lap. Langston whispered something to her, and she flinched, her shoulders hunching. Caleb's fists clenched, but he kept his face blank, years of discipline kicking in. Then it happened again, Emma's signal, quick and deliberate. He didn't wait. He stepped forward, cutting off Price mid-sentence. "Your Honor, she's signaling again. You need to stop this and check on her." The room erupted shouts, jeers, Price throwing his hands up. "This is absurd," he yelled. Hawthorne's face went red. "Mr. Warwick, you're this close to contempt." But Clara stood up, her voice sharp. "I saw it too. Your Honor, something's wrong with that girl." The room went quiet, all eyes on Hawthorne. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Recess. Now. I want this looked into." In the hallway, as the crowd spilled out, a group of Langston's supporters cornered Caleb near the vending machines. One, a burly man with a red tie, jabbed a finger at him. "You're ruining a good man's life. You know that stirring up lies about a kid." His voice was loud, drawing stares. Caleb stood still, his eyes locked on the man's, calm but unyielding. "I'm not the one hurting her," he said, his voice low. Cutting through the noise, the man faltered, stepping back, but his friends jeered, egging him on. Caleb's hand rested on his belt, not threatening, just steady, like he was still guarding the tomb. The group dispersed when a court officer approached, but their words lingered. A fresh wound. Caleb glanced at the window, catching Emma's reflection as she passed with Langston, her bracelet glinting. That star charm, it was familiar, tugging at a memory he couldn't place. A court officer escorted Emma to a private room with Detective Sarah Coleman. Caleb stayed back, Price glaring at him. "You're finished." "Warwick," Price hissed, "you're dragging a kid into your delusional crusade." Caleb didn't blink. He'd stood through worse hurricanes, freezing nights, crowds of tourists at the tomb. This was nothing. But when Sarah returned, her face grim, Caleb knew he'd been right. Emma had spilled everything, years of abuse, hidden behind Langston's wealth and charm. The distress signal was her only way to cry out. Caleb's chest tightened, but he kept his posture straight, his eyes on the floor. The courtroom buzzed as the news spread, the focus shifting from fraud to something darker. During the recess, Caleb lingered near the courthouse steps, the summer heat pressing down. A woman approached, her face pinched with anger. "Evelyn, Emma's stepmother. You're tearing our family apart," she said, her voice shaking, loud enough for bystanders to turn. "You've got no right, poking into our lives." Caleb met her gaze, his voice calm but firm. "I saw a kid asking for help. I'm not the one who failed her." Evelyn's face flushed, but she stormed off, her heels clicking. Caleb noticed her hands trembling, clutching her purse like it held secrets. He filed it away, his instincts sharp from years of watching, waiting. Back inside, he caught Clara's eye, her nod a quiet reassurance. The trial resumed, but the air had shifted, heavier now, charged with the weight of Emma's truth. Price didn't back down. The next day, he tore into Caleb in court, his voice booming. This man's a nobody, a washed-up soldier chasing glory with a made-up story. The gallery whispered, pointing, laughing. A local paper ran a story that night: former tomb guard disrupts trial with wild claims. Caleb's sister texted him, saying neighbors were gossiping, calling him a troublemaker. His dad, a retired colonel, left a voicemail. "You sure about this, son?" Caleb didn't reply. He couldn't explain the fire in his gut, the way Emma's eyes haunted him. He kept showing up, standing at the back of the courtroom, ignoring the stares. Sarah pulled him aside during a break, her voice low. "You were right about the signal. It's real, and we found bruises, fresh ones." She paused, studying him. "You ever think about police work, Warwick?" He shook his head, glancing at his faded tomb guard badge, tucked inside his jacket. "Just doing my job," he said. Sarah mentioned Langston's phone, how he never let it out of his sight. Caleb nodded. "Check the messages. Timestamps from when she signaled." Sarah raised an eyebrow but jotted it down. That night, Caleb sat in his apartment, staring at a photo of himself at the tomb, rifle steady, steps perfect. He wondered if he'd gone too far, stirring up a storm, but Emma's face kept him awake, her silent plea louder than any shout. The next day, Sarah got a warrant for Langston's phone, which she found changed everything: texts, threatening Emma to keep quiet or else, and photos of her bruises, hidden in a locked folder. Caleb's timestamp tip lined up perfectly. The courtroom buzzed as Sarah presented the evidence, Langston's face paling, Price's smirk faltering. Emma, in a closed session, told Sarah how Langston had hurt her, how she'd learned the signal from a school video, practicing it in secret, hoping someone would see. At the next break, Caleb stood alone by the courthouse fountain, the water's steady trickle grounding him. A young boy, maybe 10, approached, his dad trailing behind. "Are you the guy who said that girl's in trouble?" the kid asked, eyes wide. Caleb nodded, unsure where this was going. The boy's dad, a gruff man in a trucker hat, snorted, "You're wasting everyone's time, pal. Stick to guarding statues." The words hit like a punch, but Caleb just looked at the boy, who seemed curious, not cruel. "Sometimes you see something wrong. You gotta speak up," Caleb said, his voice soft but firm. The boy nodded, clutching a toy soldier, while his dad pulled him away, muttering. Caleb watched them go, his hand brushing the badge in his pocket, a reminder of why he couldn't stop. Price fought back, accusing Caleb of planting the idea in Emma's head, manipulating a scared kid to frame Langston. "He's a liar," Price shouted, pointing at Caleb. The crowd outside the courthouse grew, Langston's supporters waving signs, "Warwick's a fraud." Caleb walked through them, head high, ignoring the shouts. His old unit at Arlington started pulling away. A friend, Tom, called him. "You're making us look bad." "Man," Tom said, "this ain't what Sentinels do." Caleb gripped his phone, knuckles white. "I saw a kid in trouble. Tom, what was I supposed to do?" Tom hung up. That night, a letter slid under Caleb's door. No name, just a threat. "Back off, or you'll pay." He stared at it, then tucked it away, his hands steady but his heart pounding. Caleb found himself at a diner after court, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes, recognized him from the news. "You're that guy, right?" "Stirring up trouble at the trial," she said, pouring his coffee. Her tone wasn't cruel, just curious. But it stung all the same. Caleb nodded, stirring his coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the mug. "Just trying to help a kid," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The waitress paused, then slid a piece of pie toward him. "On the house." "Not everyone's against you," she said, her smile small but genuine. Caleb nodded, the pie untouched, his eyes on the window where rain started to fall. He thought of Emma, of that star charm, and suddenly remembered a training session years ago, a kid's bracelet left at the tomb, a star just like hers. It felt like a sign, but he couldn't place why. Clara Hensley kept him going. She caught him in the hallway, her voice firm. "You're doing right. Caleb, don't let them break you." She mentioned Evelyn, Emma's stepmom, acting nervous in court, whispering to Langston. Caleb had noticed it too, Evelyn's tight smiles, her hovering over Emma like she was hiding something. He passed the tip to Sarah, who started digging into Evelyn's role. The trial shifted hard after that. Emma's recorded testimony was brutal years of abuse, locked doors, Langston's hands leaving marks. She said Evelyn knew but did nothing, too scared of losing her status. The jury's faces hardened, Price's arguments crumbling. Caleb stood outside the courtroom, barred from entering by Hawthorne's order, but he didn't leave. He couldn't. As the trial wore on, Caleb noticed a man in the gallery, older, with a military haircut and a worn jacket. He watched Caleb closely, his gaze not hostile but intense. During a recess, the man approached, his voice gruff. "You're Warwick." "Right, I was a sentinel." 92 to 95. Caleb nodded, bracing for criticism. Instead, the man extended a hand. "You're doing what we swore to do, protect. Don't let these clowns tell you different." Caleb shook his hand, the grip firm, and for the first time in days, he felt a spark of pride. The man slipped him a folded note with a phone number. "Call if you need us," he said, then walked away. Caleb tucked the note away, his resolve strengthened, standing taller as he watched Emma pass with a court officer, her bracelet catching the light. Sarah's investigation blew the case wide open. Evelyn's texts with Langston showed she'd known about the abuse for years, covering it up to protect their lifestyle. A former maid came forward, describing Emma's tears, locked in her room, while Evelyn looked the other way. The jury took 2 hours to convict Langston on all abuse charges, the fraud case fading into the background. Evelyn was arrested as an accomplice. The courtroom was silent as the verdict came down. Langston's head bowed. Emma safe in a secure location. Sarah found Caleb later, her voice soft. "You saved her life, Warwick." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. He didn't need thanks. He needed Emma to be okay. Outside the courthouse, Caleb stood under a street lamp as dusk settled, the air cooling. A teenage girl, part of a school group touring Arlington, approached him, her phone in hand. "You're the guy from the trial, right?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Caleb nodded. Wary, she showed him her phone a viral post on X, a blurry photo of him standing firm in court, captioned, "This guy saw what no one else did." The comments were mixed, some calling him a hero, others a fraud. But the girl smiled. "I think you're brave," she said, then ran back to her group. Caleb stared at the post, his chest tight, not with pride but with a quiet ache. He didn't want fame, just truth. He pocketed his phone and kept watch, the courthouse looming behind him. Hawthorne summoned Caleb back to court the next day, in front of the gallery. The judge stood, his voice heavy. "Mr. Warwick, I misjudged you. This court owes you an apology." The room was quiet, a few heads nodding, others looking away. Price avoided Caleb's gaze. The crowd outside had vanished, their signs littering the ground, but the win felt empty. The news barely mentioned Caleb, praising Emma's courage and Sarah's detective work. A final article called him a lucky bystander. His old unit at the tomb wouldn't take him back, citing controversy. His sister texted, saying the neighbors had moved on, but his dad's silence cut deeper. Caleb didn't care about fame, but being erased like that, it hurt. At home that night, Caleb found a package at his door, no sender listed. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden star, like the one on Emma's bracelet. A note read, "She wanted you to have this." Caleb's breath caught, his fingers tracing the star's edges. He remembered now that bracelet at the tomb. Years ago, left by a kid during a school trip. He'd kept it safe, turned it in, never knowing who it belonged to. Could it have been Emma's? The thought hit him hard. A connection across years, a kid's cry reaching him through time. He set the star on his shelf, next to his tomb guard badge, his hands shaking. He didn't cry, but his eyes burned, the weight of it all settling in. He kept going, standing outside the courthouse daily, watching, waiting. One day, Sarah found him there. "Emma wants to see you," she said. Caleb followed her to a small office where Emma sat, coloring. Her pigtails were neater, her eyes brighter. She looked up and smiled. "You saw me," she said, her voice small but clear. She handed him a drawing, a soldier in a tomb guard uniform, labeled "My Hero." Caleb's eyes burned, but he just nodded, tucking the paper away. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice rough. She hugged him, quick and tight, before Sarah led her away. Caleb stood there, alone, the weight of it all settling in. The story didn't end with fanfare. Caleb went home, the drawing on his fridge, a quiet reminder. Arlington moved on. The news cycle churned, and the streets grew quiet. But something changed. Sarah gave a press conference, calling Caleb a silent hero who saw what no one else did. A few old tomb guards invited him to a small ceremony at Arlington, handing him a handmade badge, honor and silence. It wasn't official, but it meant everything. Caleb stood at the tomb one last time, not as a guard but as himself, watching the sentinels march, their steps perfect, rifles steady. He thought of Emma, safe now in Loudoun County, starting over. He thought of the unknowns, their sacrifices unnamed but never forgotten. The next morning, Caleb walked through Arlington National Cemetery, the dawn light soft on the white headstones. A groundskeeper, an older man who'd seen him at the tomb years ago, paused his work. "Heard what you did for that girl," he said, his voice rough but kind. He pulled a small pin from his pocket, a miniature tomb guard emblem, and pressed it into Caleb's hand. "You're still one of us," he said, then turned back to his rake. Caleb clutched the pin, his chest tight, and walked on, the silence of the cemetery wrapping around him like a promise kept. To everyone who's been doubted, pushed aside, or told their voice doesn't count, you're not wrong. You're not alone. Keep standing, keep watching, keep doing what's right, even when it hurts. Caleb did, and it saved a life. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.